Section 2, 6 Notable Amendments to Civil Rights, Today's Fair Housing Rules and Regulations, 2026 Standard. Introduction, Building on the Foundation. In the last section, we stood at the beginning, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That law planted the seed. But as you now know, it wasn't enough to stop discrimination in real-world housing transactions. So imagine the law as a house. The 1866 Act built the foundation, but over time, cracks appeared. Discrimination changed forms. Society evolved, and lawmakers had to keep building, reinforcing, and expanding protections. That's where these 6 key amendments come in. Each one added a new layer of protection, closing loopholes and shaping the way you conduct business today in 2026. As a real estate professional, understanding these amendments is not optional. It's how you avoid violations, protect your license, and properly guide your clients. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, the birth of the Fair Housing Act. Let's step into a real scenario. A buyer walks into your office, excited and ready, but behind the scenes, a seller refuses to accept their offer, not because of price, but because of who they are. Before 1968, that buyer had very limited federal protection. Then came the Civil Rights Act of 1968, better known as the Fair Housing Act. This law changed everything by introducing federal enforcement mechanisms. It made it illegal to refuse to sell or rent based on race, color, religion, or national origin, discriminate in terms or conditions of housing, advertise with discriminatory language, intimidate or retaliate against individuals exercising housing rights. Real-world example, 2026. An agent posts, "Ideal for Christian family," or "No foreigners." That is a direct violation, and today it can be tracked instantly through digital advertising audits. This amendment is where fair housing became enforceable, not just theoretical. The Architectural Barriers Act of 1968, accessibility begins now. Picture a veteran returning home with a disability, trying to access a federal building, and physically unable to enter. The Architectural Barriers Act, ABA, was one of the first laws to address physical accessibility. It required buildings funded by the federal government to include ramps and accessible entrances, designated parking, accessible communication features, like volume-controlled phones. Why this matters to you. This was the beginning of accessibility in housing and design, a concept that continues today through ADA and fair housing design requirements. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, expanding disability protections. Let's bring this into a leasing scenario. A tenant applies for housing and uses a wheelchair. The property receives federal funding. The landlord denies the application due to liability concerns. That is illegal under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This law prohibits discrimination based on disability in any program receiving federal assistance. It expanded protections beyond housing into employment, public accommodations, federally assisted programs. 2026, application. If you're working with HUD properties, Section 8 housing, federally backed developments, you must understand these obligations or risk serious violations. Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, the game changer. This is where things really expand. Imagine a landlord says, "I don't want kids in my rental, it causes too much wear and tear." Before 1988, that might have been allowed. After 1988, it's illegal. The Fair Housing Amendments Act added 2 major protected classes: disability, familial status, children under 18, pregnant women, custody situations. It also introduced reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, stronger enforcement and penalties. Real-world example, 2026. A landlord refuses an emotional support animal due to a no pets policy. That is a violation unless very narrow exceptions apply. This amendment is one of the most commonly violated areas in today's market. Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, Title II, 1990. Now let's shift to public-facing real estate. You're hosting an open house in a public housing development or government-assisted property. A client with a disability cannot access the property due to lack of accommodations. Under Title II of the ADA, that is illegal. This law applies to public housing, government services, housing assistance programs. Why this matters today: accessibility is not optional, it is expected. And in 2026, digital accessibility, websites, virtual tours, communication, is also under scrutiny. Title VIII, expansion, strengthening fair housing enforcement. This ties everything together. The expansion of civil rights laws created defined protected classes, clear enforcement processes, federal oversight through HUD, legal remedies for victims. As reinforced in federal guidance, fair housing laws now prohibit discrimination in housing-related transactions, including sale, rental, and financing, while also expanding protections to disability and familial status. The big picture: why these amendments matter to you. Each amendment solved a real-world problem. 1866, property rights; 1968, enforcement; 1973, disability protections; 1988, expansion and enforcement strength; ADA, accessibility in public spaces. Together, they form the modern fair housing system you operate in every day. Online discussion. Question. 1. What was the biggest change introduced by the Civil Rights Act of 1968? Answer. It introduced federal enforcement and made housing discrimination illegal in sales, rentals, and advertising. Question 2. Why is familial status protection important in today's market? Answer. It prevents discrimination against families with children, pregnant women, and those gaining custody, ensuring equal housing access. Question 3. How does the ADA impact real estate professionals? Answer. It requires accessibility in public housing and services, including physical access and communication accommodations.